Hey guys, hey, I hope you're doing well. I was looking around thinking about a good topic today, and I think we're finally going to talk about a thing we probably should have talked about for a little while. You'll see a lot of people complaining about so-called three true outcome baseball. I'm looking at a message board post like right now that talks about this. In fact, let me see if I can go ahead, turn my camera on and show this without necessarily like giving up everything. Well, it's going to probably show us who posted it at any rate. Anyway, it's all good. Let's see here. We'll switch over here to the screen view. My apologies to the original posters over on APBA Between the Lines. Starting around the year 2019, analytics started to take over baseball. Computers crunched tons of data at super speed and measured everything from a team's projected wins to what players' teams should sign. And this turmoil of philosophy emerged. It was called three true outcome baseball. The idea was that everything is said and done. A team's success in baseball revolves around three stats: how many home runs you hit, how many hitters your pitchers strike out, and how many hitters your pitchers walk. Now, I don't know what his source is. This is common. I hate to say this, guys. I know a lot of you guys are regulars on Delphi forums, especially on APBA Between the Lines. It's kind of the place that I go to when I want to find out what the older guy view is on baseball. So the truth is that analytics have been in baseball a lot longer than 2019, of course. I mean, sabermetrics has been a thing for a lot longer than that amount of time. But not only is it true that analytics have always been part of baseball, but there's also not a natural conclusion that you can make that, three true outcomes are going to end up measuring every single thing, right? I'm not an expert at this stuff. There are people out there who understand this better than I do, and I admittedly have not spent as much time reading about sort of the theory behind some of this as I should. My understanding from what I've gotten in the peripheries is that the current thinking around pitching is that pitchers have very, very little influence over what happens with the ball after it's hit, which makes sense if you think about the art of pitching and what happens, right? There's not a whole lot that a pitcher is going to be able to do once the ball is actually thrown up there. Where pitchers have probably the most influences on whether they can make the batter swing and miss or not. Now, I would argue that, a good pitcher will know, along with his fielders, like how certain hitters are likely to hit the ball and can pitch accordingly. Although I have reason to believe that doesn't really mean as much today as it once did, right? But, I mean, the truth is that the reason why you hear about three true outcomes so much is because, in theory, pitchers have the most influence over strikeouts and walks, and also over home runs, and this is because the rest of the defense has very little to do with the home run. I would add in the caveat that most people miss, which is that catchers are a very important part of pitching. To what extent catchers are important or not is very difficult to know or to measure. I would argue that we don't have any measurement that can tell us, how important catchers are in terms of calling pitches. Of course, that may become academic now that teams are using these electronic communications, things running off of whatever. I mean, I don't know if it runs on Bluetooth or what exactly happens, where you push a button and then the thing comes into your ear telling you what the next pitch is going to be, right? I mean, so maybe the catcher's not even calling the pitch. Maybe it's your pitching coach or something. I mean, whatever. I think it's a really bad idea, right? Teams have tried that in the past. You've had bench managers who've tried to call pitches, and if you go back in history and read about it, you'll realize quickly that it never works well. It's not a good thing. But that's off the subject, right? If you look back into the history of baseball, you will notice that, catchers have a lot to do with pitching, and you can see the evidence of that from time to time when you look at things like the catcher's ERA and you look at the catcher's effectiveness, or if you just look at individual teams. I've always suspected, for example, that the decline of Generation K that fell apart so quickly with the Mets probably had a lot to do with them getting rid of Gary Carter the way that they did, which I really think was a foolish idea, but it's the Mets. They do that sort of thing. So, I mean, because of that, I do think that there's a question as to whether this three true outcome type of baseball is naturally the result of sabermetrics, and whether this is the way that things will always be going and will never, have any other way to go or anything like that, right? I mean, I don't think that is a reasonable conclusion to make. I believe that There has, however, been a general push over time, not caused by statistics, towards these outcomes. I do think that you see that, and for good reason, right? It has been known probably since the days of Ted Williams that the best hitters are the hitters who have a good eye and who can easily determine whether a pitch is going to be a ball or a strike, and who will then refrain from swinging at a ball, right? You know that not naturally, right? Go back and watch any game from the 80s, any Kansas City Royals game, and watch Willie Wilson hitting leadoff. Yeah, he was fast, but he was also the definition of a slap hitter for that guy with the Twitter account, right? He would come up there and just slap at, the first pitch or the second pitch every single time. Didn't walk that much because he's up there slapping away at everything, right? That's not really the best attitude towards hitting if you want to hit for power, right? Now, the thing that causes a hitter to do that has a lot to do with pitch recognition, and I think has a lot to do with anxiety and other things that may be very, very difficult to train out of a player once he's hit the major league level, which is something that I think that a lot of people who comment on baseball, especially on fantasy baseball, don't fully understand or appreciate, right? But basically, like, the idea that you want to walk if you're a hitter is not something that came up once on-base percentage started to be calculated. I mean, the funny thing about batting average is that if you want a better batting average without getting more hits, you need to reduce your number of at-bats, which you can reduce by taking more walks. All right, that's pretty obvious, and Ted Williams understood that, right? That's the reason why he was able to hit 406 the way that he was, right? This isn't a surprise, and this isn't anything that's new. Right. So we know that that's an important thing, that walking is going to be an important part of strategy for hitters. Now, the big question that comes in that I see people argue about all the time, especially on Twitter, is strikeouts and power hitting, right? If you're going to hit for power, do you automatically end up striking out a lot? I would say no. Right. I think there's a lot of examples of hitters in baseball history who have hit for a lot of power without striking out a lot. I would say, however, that the ability to not strike out is probably somewhat related to the ability to take a walk, and some part of this may actually be an innate thing and may have something to do with your ability to be patient at the plate, your ability to sort of allow things to happen, right? What I'm saying with all of this, and I know it's a little bit rambling, is that this idea that analytics have pushed us towards 3 true outcome baseball is not 100% true, right? We also know, I remember reading this back from Bill James in the New Historical Baseball Abstracts. This is over 20 years ago. We know that pitchers who tend to strike out a lot of hitters tend to last longer in baseball for whatever reason. They tend not to get injured. They tend to have longer careers. They tend to be able to do more, right? That's the old Mark Fidrich syndrome, right? People talk about, it would have been great if Bird could have pitched longer, but since he was a contact pitcher, pitching towards contact, they tend not to last that long. You can look through baseball history and you'll notice this. Guys who do not have above average strikeout ratings in the league tend not to last that long. Maybe it's, natural selection and, this pitcher is not really that good, and you can tell because of the strikeout ability, or maybe not, whatever. Because of that, and because teams are competitive and are looking into this, they're going to notice this, and you will see over time more strikeouts. This is combined with this idea, like I was alluding to, that strikeouts for hitters are not really that big of a problem. And part of that is because if you're able to get a good amount of power behind your hit, in other words, if striking out more means that you're going to hit less like, Rod Carew, and you're going to hit a little more like Barry Bonds, overall your offensive production is going to be stronger. Now, we have to be careful about this, right? Because the idea that power hitting is better than hitting for average is not just some theory that people threw together. The math behind it is actually quite solid, and it's based on looking back through decades of baseball history now. You can go check out Tango Tiger and his work with, I think Fangraphs is where his stuff is located now. But if you go check that out and start going through it slowly, you'll see what I'm talking about, right? Like, this isn't something that happens just because we're only looking at the last 10 years of baseball. The last I checked, they were back through the 70s going to the late 60s. You can keep going back and keep looking at different situations and say, okay, well, what's the, what sort of value does this type of hit, say a home run or a triple or whatever, have when compared to just a base hit or a string of base hits? And you'll see that, power actually really does make a big difference in the game, right? So, it's not that surprising that, the trade-off between striking out and being able to hit for power, if that's a true trade-off, is something that works in your favor. And that's the other reason why you'll see more strikeouts and you'll see hitters okay with striking out, right? I mean, the most famous example of this, of course, is Babe Ruth, who everybody at the time knew would strike out in spectacular fashion, but when he would get a hold of one, it would go a long way, right? Now, Babe Ruth was not like a Joey Gallo type hitter. The people who say this sort of thing are insane, right? Ruth had a lot of speed, could hit doubles and triples, especially earlier in his career, and always hit for average instead of hitting under 200, right? There's a reason why you want somebody who hits a little bit better than like 190, but that's another debate for another day. Anyway, the long story short here is that 3 true outcome baseball is probably the natural outcome of baseball as time goes on and as people discover which strategies work and which strategies don't work quite as well. There is a big caveat with this, however, which is that this is not the only way to play baseball, right? And I think that we'll talk tomorrow a little bit more about this. I'll try to prevent this from being a 15-minute video since I have a cold. There's more than one way to look at this. There's more than one way to skin the cat, even though most teams will tell you today that they all do it the same way. But the big thing is that this idea that 3 true outcome baseball started in 2019 is not true. In fact, even the phrase 3 true outcome baseball comes from Usenet in the mid-90s, right? So people who are in the know that this is not a new concept that's come around. Whether it's the most efficient way to play baseball or not is kind of up for debate. Some parts are not, right? We do know that offensive efficiency is improved when you have players who hit for high slugging percentage and who can get on base, right? And that usually means a lot of walks, a lot of power hitting, and for many players, for whatever reason, a lot of power hitting means a lot more strikeouts. Whatever the logic is behind that, that's just sort of what we tend to see in history, with a number of notable exceptions. Anyway, there you have it. We'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow. I'll talk with you then. Bye-bye.